until Mr. Holden called out for you. He was still walking in your direction. We were talking and think we're gonna take a walk down the shore. Any of you want to come? Automatically looked to your moms for what they were thinking. Mom glanced from you to Ma and smiled. That sounds good to me.
That's fantastic.
Yes, that'd be very nice. My legs need some stretching. Let's go. Let's go. Thrilled, Mr. Holden threw out a thumbs up and began heading back the way he came in a light jog. Hey, don't leave us in the dust. Cliff kept going forward, but flipped around, walking backwards across the sand so he could face you again.
No worries.
Don't worry, we wouldn't leave without you. All right, we'll catch up. Ready to go? Uh-huh. Both of your moms held a hand out to you. Chuckling, you gave them each one, and you all strolled back to the rest of the group. When Liz was in reach, Ma used her free hand to pull her into it, too. Liz shook her head, but her mouth quirked into a smirk, and she didn't resist. Together as a family, you followed behind the others hand in hand. Your feet squished into wet sand as the waves rolled over them, and you didn't have a single care in the world as more and more stars began to dot the sky. Once the sun had long been out of sight, it was finally time to pack up. The closing of the day and the ever-approaching end of summer seemed to intertwine. It caused a quiet, reflective mood to blanket over the group. On the beach, Terry and Miranda took turns compressing Cove in a hug, before moving on to do the same to you. You chuckled, still overjoyed that you got to see them today. Sorry we have to go already. My parents are here. That's okay. But still, I wish you could help clear this all up. Don't worry about it. Just thanks for coming out today. It was cool having everyone here.
Yep.
Oh yeah, I'm super glad we came. Hopefully we can do it again sometime. Yeah, I'm really happy that we were able to reunite with virtually every single character. Virtually every single character in this one portion, in this one scene part. Including Shiloh and Derek, even though they didn't show Derek's portrait. I really wanted to see what Derek looked like at this age. But that's just me. Nodding, you turned your attention to Terry. She wore a large grin on her face and held a hand out for a low five. You obliged.
See you later.
Take care of yourselves, buddies. After that, they walked away, waving to you and Cove as they went down the shore. Cove waved quietly back with a small smile on his face. You waved too. Bye, have a safe trip back. I'm happy I got to see them. You looked at Cove. He nodded.
Me too.
Me too. Taking you by surprise, Terry jumped and twisted around. She kept up with Miranda by walking backwards. She kept the mood of your farewell light by shooting finger guns at you and Cove. Miranda bumped her with a hip. It left everyone with a laugh just before they disappeared down the bend. Vaughn?
Come on.
Hey, Cove, could you come here? Both of your parents were motioning for you. The two of you went to them. Tons of things ended up at the beach over the course of the day, so there was still so much to pack up, and the parents needed help. With a nod, you got to it, stuffing various things into bags and bundling them up in towels. Once things were ready to go, everyone filled their arms with as much as they could carry. Absolutely no one wanted this to be a back-and-forth kind of task. The walk back home ended up being mostly quiet. Each person seemed to be feeling the effects of the day. A cool breeze carried you across the sand and onto the road. There was a sigh of relief from what felt like the group as a whole when they arrived back to the neighborhood. Well, hello, everyone. I'm guessing it's Baxter. You glanced to the side and spotted a very recognizable face walking down the road. Yep, I called it. Oh, hi, Baxter, because he was pretty much the only character that we haven't seen during this whole sequence.
How are you?
Do you need help with that? It's alright. This is our mess to clean up.
Well.
If you're sure, then, I was simply heading home after getting some fresh air. The season is almost over, after all. Yeah, Baxter was only a tourist. He wouldn't be in town much longer. This might be the last time you happened to cross paths with him. You knew that, and so did he. If you have a minute, I'd just like to say it was a pleasure getting to know you both this summer. His head tilted towards you, and he smiled warmly. Baxter offered you his hand. You used your freer hand to shake his. You waved goodbye instead. You patted his shoulder. You hugged him. You side-hugged him. You raised your hand for a high five. I'll side-hug him. It took a moment, but after shuffling what you were carrying, you were able to free one of your hands enough to pull Baxter into a quick hug. He genuinely laughed and looked at you fondly when you let go. I think we did end up as good friends. I really enjoyed meeting you. Good luck on your next semester at school. You didn't say anything. I really enjoyed meeting you.
Glad to hear it.
I'm delighted to hear that. I enjoyed this vacation immensely thanks to you. Baxter tried to shake Cove's hand this time. He was a little incredulous for a moment, but then Cove eventually shifted what he was carrying and took Baxter's hand. It wasn't long, but it was a solid handshake. Baxter was clearly pleased. I wish we had more time together, but it was still a nice ride while it lasted. Would happily do it all over again. Bye, Baxter. Yeah, bye. Baxter nodded and walked a few steps toward his condo. He then stopped and waved.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. I think Baxter is also another possible romanceable character with the upcoming DLC for this game. Baxter sauntered away completely and disappeared inside the condo to return to his own things. His time with you and your family and friends ending. You paused for a moment, staring at where he went. But afterwards, you looked back over at the rest of the group. Lee and Liz were just going inside your house. You couldn't spot Kyra or Mr. Holden anywhere, but the door to their house was wide open. Mom approached you with an amused look on her face. Seems like you're holding up some Holden things. Surprised, you glanced down to take a quick inventory of what you were holding. Mom was right, some of it belonged to the neighbors. Would you mind dropping it off now? Can do, it's not a problem. Thank you very much. Cove took a few steps towards his house and stopped, waiting for you.
Good night.
Good night, Cove. I'll see you inside, Vaughn. Night. You caught up to Cove, and together you went over to his house. Walking in the front door, you saw Kyra and Mr. Holden busily unpacking already. Things were scattered on counters, and they were moving around each other, putting the items away. They both lifted their heads when Cove closed the front door. Hey! It's nice seeing you again already, Vaughn. Her teasing tone brought a slight smile onto your face. You hefted the stuff in your arms a little closer. I ended up with things of yours from the beach. Oh, thanks for getting that to us. You can put it here on that coffee table. Mr. Holden pointed at the surface he was referring to, and you immediately left what didn't belong to your family there. Cove put his own things down on the floor, just at his feet, wading through everything strewn about to reach his parents. Putting your family stuff on the ground for a moment, you dusted your hands off and straightened up. You needed a second of rest and a minute to restitute it all. You went over to where the others were too. Kyra opened her arms wide, wanting to hug you. You accepted. Happily, you went to her. I mean, you're about to be she's about to be like your mother-in-law. She held on tightly. Over the years, you were able to form a good rapport with her, and you were grateful for that. You could feel in her hug how much Kyra had grown to care about you. It brought an affectionate smile to your face. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. It was a blast. It's no problem. I had fun too. Kyra eventually released you, but patted the tops of your shoulders as a final gesture.
Thank you.
Every time I've gotten to come by, it's been an absolute joy. Things really couldn't have worked out better. Mr. Holden took a step closer to you. Kyra moved aside to let him say goodbye too. He grinned. Thanks for always being such a friendly neighbor. And not just right now, but for as long as I've known you. I didn't always make it easy, but you and your family are good people. I really, truly appreciate it.
Thanks very much.
Thanks again, Vaughn. So much. At that, Mr. Holden reached over and gave you a soft pat on the top of your head. I'm really glad that you're my neighbor. You're good people too. You hugged him. Goodbye, Mr. Holden. You hugged him. Taking him by surprise, you latch your arms around Mr. Holden, because he's gonna eventually be your father-in-law too. He let out a small squeak and went rigid, just like his son. After a moment, he relaxed and began to lightly pat your back before shifting into a full hug. You held on firmly. Thank you for being a good neighbor. As you let go, he sniffed, but when he met your gaze once more, his mouth pulled into a wide, happy grin. Mr. Holden was staring at you, but his gaze seemed far away. Maybe he was looking back at you, who used to be the 8-year-old he had asked to be his son's new friend.
See you.
Bye, Vaughn. You smiled softly. Then, Cove took a step forward. He gestured to his pile of things he had carried into the house.
Don't worry
about all that. I'll put stuff away in a few minutes. Right, I need to do the same with my family. I figured. Cove walked you to the door and held it open. Taking one last check around to make sure you had all your things to bring home, you went into the road. He leaned his body against the door frame, not following you out. So this is it, huh? Actually, that's not what I mean. His expression twisted and he shook his head a bit, like he was trying to banish the pensive thoughts.
Bye.
I'll just say bye. Bye. I'll see you soon. Your mouth built to a soft smile, and you weren't sure who you were trying to reassure anymore. Cove reached forward and gently cupped your face with one hand. His thumb trailed across your cheek for several heartbeats. Mesmerized by his blue eyes, you stepped forward, delighted to oblige the request he was silently asking. He met you halfway as you smiled into the kiss. It was soft with longing, and your chest ached knowing that there couldn't be anything more than this, at least for now. One of his hands grabbed onto the door handle and firmly held it. He was stopping himself from coming along with you. As you walked over to your own front door, you stopped. Turning around, you spotted Cove right when you were left him. You laughed quietly to yourself. For a small pause, you both stared at each other from across the street. Good night. You blew him a kiss. You waved. You ran back to hug and goodbye. I'm gonna blow him a kiss. I'm not gonna run all the way back there. I think that's a little too extra for me. For me, it's too extra. I'm gonna see him again. Cove reached out like he was catching it off to the side, and then he curled his fist to his chest, holding the kiss close. Your lips curled into a beaming smile. Things couldn't be dragged out any longer. After one more shared smile, you opened the door and went inside, shutting it behind you. A few steps in, you saw your family gathered in the living room. They were still busy unpacking and cleaning. You added the things you brought to the pile in the kitchen counter. Mom stood up, rubbing her eyes a bit. She yawned loudly. I'm bushed. How about we finish the rest of the chores tomorrow? Yeah, this is a tomorrow problem. Yes, honestly, it's too late for this.
Thanks.
Please and thank you. Ma put her hands on her hips and turned to assess the room. Ma was not one who liked to leave the mess about, but she sighed.
All right.
I suppose we can make an exception to the usual rule. It's been a really long day. Colin and I, normally, we do make it a point after we have a party or something, we do make it a point to make sure everything is cleaned up before we go to bed. Especially, like, the kitchen, the dishes, like, we try to make it a point to do that. And I would say 99.9% of the time, we've been very consistent. Which is a pretty good, which is pretty good. Liz grinned contentedly. Lee wasted no time in skipping over to you and hooked you into a side hug. Good night. I hope you have the loveliest of dreams of you-know-who. Lee ended that sentence with a wink and a hearty laugh. She let you go. I hope you have good dreams too. You hugged her back, you shook your head, you blushed, you laughed, you hugged her back. You pulled her close into a bear hug. Lee giggled until you released her. I hope you sleep well too. Oh, I totally will. The moment my head hits the pillow, I'll be out. Here's to us, Vaughn. Tonight, tomorrow, and forever. I really do like my cousin. Family forever. Lee leaned in close to whisper in your ear. You didn't fail to catch the teasing look on her face.
Aww.
Exactly. There's no escape. That got a laugh out of you. You lightly pushed her shoulder. Lee stretched her arms high over her head. She yawned loudly and looked at you with tired eyes. I think that's my cue to head to bed. Bye. I think so too. Have fun sharing your room with Liz. She laughed at that, and Lee shuffled off towards the guest bedroom. Before you had a chance to do anything else, you could feel the top of your head being tapped. You spun around to see Liz smirking. Nighty-night. I'm heading to bed too. It's been a long day, and I have a lot to prepare for tomorrow. Exhaling, you automatically started fixing the back of your hair. When Liz didn't immediately walk away, you smiled softly at her. Everything okay? Her gaze moved away, and you knew she had more to say. You waited patiently for Liz to compose her thoughts. It's been a good summer. It was nice to come back home. You nodded, and Liz gave you a teasing nudge as she went by. Amused, you turned and watched her go. Love you, baby brother. Good night, Liz. I love you too. Bye, old sister. You gave her a hug goodnight. You smiled. I love you too. Liz stopped walking and stared at you for a moment. She smiled softly at you. Get some sleep soon. Morning will be here faster than you know it. I will. When Liz was out of sight, Mom started up the next conversation over her shoulder. Aren't you heading up to bed too? I want to relax first. I want to finish getting everything cleaned up. Yeah.
What?
What? Are you sure? It can wait. Glancing around the room a moment, the disarray made you feel a bit twitchy. I don't know, I'm one of those people who it's hard for me to fall asleep knowing that the house is not, at least in some order, and somewhat cleaned up. Like, I just can't, it's better for me and my sleep to actually clean things up before going to bed versus going to bed earlier and taking care of it the next day. Glancing around the room a moment, the disarray made you feel a bit twitchy. You had a feeling that you'd sleep sounder if you took your time cleaning before bed. Exactly. The game knows. Yeah. Ma came over too, smiling understandingly. She pulled you into a big hug. All right, do what you need to do. I love you. When you were done hugging Ma, Mom pulled you into another hug. Their actions, basically handing you off to the other, had you laughing jovially.
I love you.
I love you so much. Good night. I love you too. You're the best parents. I didn't say anything. I love you too. Aww. They both couldn't resist taking turns hugging you again. Your smile widened. It felt good to be so loved. Good night, kiddo. Sleep tight. Good night, sweetie. Night. After that, your moms headed off towards their bedrooms down the hall. You were about to turn the other direction when you heard Mom's voice. And don't let the bedbugs bite. You heard Ma chuckling as you watched them go with a smile. It was a while later, when you were finished putting everything away. You didn't rush the process at all. Your sleeping hours may have been cut into, but you felt so much better getting this done. You sighed contentedly, gazing at the organized living room and kitchen. Before you could take a well-earned break on the couch, something out of the window caught your eye. Your feet brought you right in front of the large window spanning the length of the black back wall. You stared out into the hills behind your house. As if on cue, your phone came on, alerting you of a new notification. It was Cove. Want to hang out on the hill tonight? Why not? Something inside told you that this was the right kind of night to take a trip out there. You sent back a very quick message. Yeah. You went over to the front door, and stepping over the threshold, you gave the living room one last glance over your shoulder. Then you shut the door behind you. Silently, you made your way to the poppy hill. With light steps in the dark, you walked across the hills behind your house. Up ahead at the very top, silhouetted beneath the night sky, was a familiar figure already waiting there. Smiling, you wondered just how he always got there first. You even had the advantage of living closer. Then again, and maybe it was only in your mind, but somehow Cove was intrinsically linked with this place. After all these years, it would be weird to scan this horizon and not find him there, as surreal as the shore without the sea. The distance between you was growing shorter by the second. Hearing the grass and earth crunch under your feet, Cove turned. A grin spread over his face as he saw you. You took your place standing behind him on the crest of the poppy hill, looking out over the ocean. Same as you'd done on countless times since he'd first arrived, when you'd found him on this very same spot.
Vaughn.
Vaughn. He had officially broken the silence, the spell that had held you both in place. You looked at him expectantly. There's something I always kind of wondered about. He cocked his head, giving you a sidelong glance. What did you think about when we met? I was just a kid you'd never seen before, bawling his eyes out on the hill next to your house. He chuckled, his eyes drifting towards the sea beyond, before flickering back to you. The way his gaze pulled back to you made it clear that he was genuinely invested in the topic. Luckily for him, you remembered what initially struck you in that moment. It was as if it only had happened yesterday. Well, I remember noticing your very bright green hair. Cove burst into genuine laughter at your reply. I guess that's fair. It did kind of stand out. Sighing a bit, you continued to reminisce about that first meeting. I also remember feeling bad about what was happening. I remember that too. He ran a hand through his hair, and you knew his line of questioning wasn't at an end, even before he spoke again.
I mean...
Do you remember what you thought about me? You know, as a person? Was I annoying or mean or... I wanted to get to know you. I didn't know what the feelings were at the time, but I thought you were cute right away. That's not true. That's not true. It would be romantic, but if I was being 100% honest, I think that wasn't true. I thought you were special somehow. I just worried about you because you're so sad. I don't really remember anymore. I wanted to get to know you. Cove's eyes widened, openly amazed by your response.
Really?
Really? I don't know what I did to deserve that. It's nice of you. Cove's hand drifted to the $20 had nothing to do with it. The $20 in my pocket had nothing to do with it. Cove's hand drifted to the scar on his arm, his fingers unconsciously gliding over the mark. It was much less noticeable than it had been when the neon pink cast had first come off, shrunken gradually over the years as his body healed, then dwarfed in comparison to his growing body. Still, his fingers came back to it without thinking. He gave a half smile, not meeting your eyes. I feel bad now. The thoughts I had were, well, considering what you were thinking, I had come across as a lot worse as of a kid. You didn't like me?
No.
No, it definitely wasn't that. Cove lifted his head up, finally committing to meet your eyes fully once more. I wouldn't care if he didn't like me back then. I mean, we were kids. We were like 8-year-old kids. So what? There's a lot of people that I probably didn't like when I first met them, but I grow to like them over time. So I wouldn't have cared one bit. Because my character would not have crushed. My 8-year-old self would not have crushed on his 8-year-old self. And before you say anything, yes, I did have crushes at 8 years old. I did. I don't know if you would necessarily call it like... There's obviously, it wasn't nothing, it was never anything sexual, not at that age. But even at that age, I had grown attachments to specific other kids my age who happened to be boys also. I remember you that day. I remember it went really well. I don't think I'd ever be able to forget. I can picture the way you looked back when I first saw you standing right there, right here. I still know the expression on your face when you chose to sit with me in the grass. He chuckled self-derisively, interrupting his own monologue. You scared me at first. I figured I'd be alone out until I had to face my dad again, and then suddenly another kid appeared out of nowhere. It was startling, but I got over that fast. You were a strange person in a strange place, but in that moment, you were exactly what I needed. Somebody I could talk to freely about what was happening and how it made me feel. And you listened to me. You stayed with me. He sighed and bit his lip as he gave a small smile. I was a little bit spoiled growing up. You let him continue. A little? Yeah, you were. It wasn't bad. You were dealing with a lot. I'm just gonna let him continue. He looked off again, seeking clarity for his thoughts in the expanse of the night sky. What I'm trying to say is, when I was younger, I viewed myself basically as the center of the universe. I mean, most kids that age do. I didn't even imagine it wasn't like that. I know 40-year-olds who feel like they're the center of the universe.
I mean...
Things didn't simply happen. That would be weird, according to my little kid brain. It made far more sense than that everything in my life had a specific connection to me, somehow, right? He sought affirmation in you, wavy brows raised as he tried to explain his childlike logic. So at that time, you felt almost unreal. Like you weren't just anyone, some other kid who happened to live in that neighborhood with your own whole life that wasn't connected to Cove Holden. Not to me. You were there so that you could find me when I was lost. Though it turns out you were there for that. You were trying to find me because something had sent you specifically to do that. I just didn't expect it to be my dad. I guess he knew more about what I needed than I thought. He chuckled, shaking his head as he shook off the thought. I kind of expected it all to vanish like a dream when that night was over. I would wake up and everything would be the same again. I'd be back in my bed at home, my real home with both my parents. The future was something I couldn't picture anymore. I didn't know what school would be like when I went back, or the table where I'd eat breakfast in the next morning, or anything. And if I couldn't imagine it, how could I think it was something actually happening? I couldn't grasp my new reality. It was too big for me to hold all at once. So I never thought I'd see you again. Then Cove beamed at you, his eyes shining bright, and I never, ever would have been able to guess that 10 years later, when I was a grown-up, the two of us would still be together. I'm so glad I met you. It's hard to believe it's been so long. Guess that makes me your dream come true. Mere words don't encompass the joy you felt, he smiled. It's hard to believe it's been so long. Yeah, but it makes sense. If time flies, when you're having fun, being with you must be like launching it in a rocket. But the smile faded from his face and his eyebrows drew together. That was the worst day of my life at the time. The day my family broke apart. It was too heavy for me to even think about. I felt that way for I don't know how long. He held a hand over his heart, connecting with the pain he'd felt as a child, and looked at you earnestly.
It's okay.
But that was never really true. Things have only gotten better with me and with Dad and Mom. It was the change we all needed. His eyes were growing misty. That's a very mature realization about divorce, about your parents' divorce. So when I remember that time right now, it's not the point in my life that was over. It's not the point that my life was over. It was only the moment that I met the man I love. When I was crying to a stranger over what I thought I'd lost, I didn't have any idea that he would be the one thing in the world that actually wouldn't be able to live without. I never want to lose. You're so wonderful. Thank you for all this. You can reply that. I love you. He took in a breath, forever amazed whenever you spoke those words.
I love you.
I love you too, Vaughn. Then you hugged him, then you gripped his shoulders, then you ruffled his hair, then you kissed him, then you teared up, then you grinned back at him, then you kissed him. He leaned into the kiss, his lips soft against yours. Cove sighed contentedly. His voice was as delicate as the petals on the poppies which crowned this hill. Hey, Vaughn. I'm so grateful you always took care of me. I mean, he takes care of us too. You didn't even know what to say back to that. His heartfelt appreciation left you speechless. He tilted his head up, thoughts lost in the sparse clouds above. I wonder how late it is. I guess it doesn't really matter. My dad is fine with me being out whenever. You could just use your phone to check the time. You could still text your dad about what you're doing. I'm gonna message my moms. My moms might care, but I don't feel like telling them. You wanted to make sure you message your mom about what's going on. I'm gonna say I'm the responsible one. Except for that time that I apparently snuck out and stayed over at Cove's house. Scandalous. Ooh, I'm so rebellious. You could still text your dad about what you're doing. I'm gonna message my moms. He might appreciate it.
I guess.
Probably. You were pleased to see Cove slip his phone out of his pocket and type away at it. You also brought your phone out long enough to shoot off a text. They wouldn't see it anytime soon, but they'd be in the loop once they were up. Are you going to lay in the grass now? Wow, how'd you know? Lucky guess, Cove. With a chuckle, Cove plopped down onto the ground and laid on his back, his usual way of spending time there. You stayed standing, you sat down, you sat on Cove's chest, you laid on your back, you laid down and snuggled against him. You lowered yourself against Cove's side in the grass and wrapped an arm over his chest. Cove smiled at you and used his free hand to cradle your face. The both of you, wow, it suddenly got so late. The both of you fully settled in to relax on the hill. It felt like just the beginning of one of your nightly outings, but then you realized the sun was peeking out over the horizon. Cove spoke up with a disbelieving tone.
Huh.
It really was late. Your neighbor wasn't a stranger to being awake at dawn. However, not like this. He was normally an early sleeper, early riser. This unexpected sunrise particularly awed him. The two of you watched on silently as the sun began to light the world. Cove then propped himself back up on the backs of his arms, and looked at you with a soft expression on his face. Do you want to go back home? I could carry you if you're not too tired. If you're too tired, I'd rather stay a little longer. You couldn't resist a yawn, but you were serious. It couldn't be time to go already. Cove chuckled affectionately and gripped you a little more.
I get it.
Okay, but it's been a long day. We've done a lot of things, like, really a lot. It has to end sometime. If it were me in real life, I'd be ready to go home. The sun's coming up, I'm like, I'm ready to go home and actually get to bed and actually get sleep. But the game needs to railroad us because they need to get to proposal? No. I know, you're right. Since when were you okay with things ending? Does it really have to end? Yeah, I'm gonna say I know you're right, because I do want to get to bed, if it were me. Yeah, too bad I am on that one. Huh. But we can stay if you want to. Cove smiled brightly at you, as warm as the new rays of the sun that were tickling your skin. In that moment, you couldn't have appreciated him being there more. You situated yourself to be comfortable. You leaned into Cove, you kissed him, you teasingly asked him to marry you. You earnestly asked him to marry you. I'm gonna do it. I know we're 18, but you know what? YOLO. You only asked him to marry you. Marriage. It was such a big step to take, and yet it seemed so natural. You wanted to be with Cove. You needed him to be yours forever. You'd grown up together, first as friends, and now as partners. Cove would stick by you, always. The two of you had moments where you spoke about your possible futures. You knew his feelings on marriage. Cove wasn't afraid of that commitment. Marriage would just be formalizing what you already were sure of. Marriage would make a dream of yours come true. Marriage would make Cove happy. You want to take control of what to come next. This is the most accurate. Marriage is one of the things that I always dreamed of, even as a small child. Like I said, I always had this vision as a kid that I would get married. At the time to a woman, because this was before I realized I was gay. Again, with the woman and the son and the daughter and the picket fence with the house with the cats and the dogs and all that. You felt the promise of being wedded was important to him, and there was no one other than Cove you wanted to share it with. You would be kidding yourself to pretend having Cove as your husband wasn't what you wanted. You loved Cove. You loved him so much. It was time to stop kidding. Cove, your voice tensed with building emotion. You couldn't keep this casual. Cove smiled a little, his eyes bright and full of interest. He leaned in closer as he waited to hear what you had to say. Will you marry me? Marry me. Cove James Holden, you are the love of my life. I want to marry you. I want us to get married. It's nothing, just never mind. Cove James Holden, you are the love of my life. I want to marry you.
Yes!
I do too. Wow. No hesitation. Oh! He buried his face in his hands immediately after that outburst. His bangs flapped down and hid the tips of his fingers as he hung his head low. Really? Oh, okay, that was easy. Wait, I haven't even explained it all yet. Thank you. You are so wonderful. You were stunned. Oh, okay, that was easy. You laughed in sheer amazement. You hadn't even made a speech or anything, and Cove didn't need his usual processing time. Cove was still unable to face you directly. He'd curled in on himself, his back shaking, and you realized he was trembling. Are you crying? Cove's breath hitched and he nodded shakily. You leaned closer to him and smiled softly at your Cove. You got down on one knee. You picked a poppy to offer to Cove. You got on one knee and offered Cove a poppy. You looked straight at him. I'm very traditional, old-fashioned traditional, so you got on one knee and offered Cove a poppy.